This story is titled Living in Her Shadow. My name is Diane. I'm 48 years old, living in a cozy little house in upstate New York, surrounded by oak trees and the gentle hum of small town life. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where time seems to move a little slower. It was here that I met James, the man I thought would be my forever. James is 50, charming in a quiet, unassuming way. He's the type of man who holds doors open, remembers your favorite coffee order, and never forgets to kiss your forehead before bed. When we first started dating, he felt like a gift I didn't know I deserved. After my divorce 5 years ago, I had resigned myself to the idea that love wasn't in the cards for me. But James changed all that. At first, everything was perfect. Our relationship blossomed naturally. Movie nights, Sunday brunches, long walks by the lake. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was enough. But then the comments started. At first, they were small, almost imperceptible. We'd be talking about music, and he'd mention how his ex, Rachel, had an impeccable taste in jazz. Or we'd go out to dinner, and he'd offhandedly note how Rachel used to love this kind of wine. I brushed it off, thinking it was harmless. After all, we all have pasts, right? But it didn't stop. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen making dinner, James walked in and leaned against the counter. "You're using garlic powder?" he asked, a note of surprise in his voice. Rachel always swore by fresh garlic, said it made all the difference. I froze, the knife trembling in my hand. "Well, I'm not Rachel," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He chuckled, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Of course you're not. No one could ever be Rachel." That was the first time the comparison felt like a slap. As weeks turned into months, Rachel's ghost became a constant presence in our relationship. She was everywhere, in his stories, his preferences, even in the way he'd look at me as though measuring me against some invisible standard. I tried to talk to him about it, hoping he'd see how much it was hurting me. One night, as we sat on the couch, I mustered the courage to bring it up. "James, can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned to me, his face curious but unconcerned. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "It's about Rachel," I said carefully. "You mention her a lot, and it makes me feel like I'm competing with her." He frowned, his brow furrowing. "Competing? Diane, that's ridiculous. Rachel's my past. You're my present." "Then why do I feel like I'm constantly being compared to her?" I asked, my voice breaking. "It's like no matter what I do, I'll never be good enough." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're overthinking this, Diane. Rachel was a big part of my life, sure, but that doesn't mean I love you any less." His words were meant to reassure me, but they felt like a dismissal. He didn't understand, or maybe he didn't want to. The final straw came on a crisp autumn morning. We were out for a walk, the leaves crunching beneath our feet. I was telling him about a promotion I was up for at work, excitement bubbling in my voice. "That's great." "Diane," he said, smiling. "Rachel always loved her career too. She was so driven." I stopped in my tracks, the wind biting at my cheeks. "Why do you keep doing that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Doing what?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Bringing her up. Comparing us. It's like you're still in love with her." James sighed, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Diane, I'm not comparing you. I'm just reminiscing. Rachel was an important part of my life, but she's gone. You're here. You're the one I'm with." "But am I enough for you?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Or will I always be second to her?" He didn't answer right away, and in that silence I felt my heart break. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. Loving James felt like walking through a maze with no way out, always searching for a love that felt just out of reach. In the weeks that followed that painful conversation, I felt myself pulling away from James. It wasn't intentional at first, just a natural reaction to the growing ache in my chest. The warmth we once shared had turned cold, replaced by a creeping sense of doubt and inadequacy. James, to his credit, noticed the shift. He started asking more questions, paying closer attention. "Are you okay?" he'd ask, his voice tinged with concern. But each time I gave him the same answer. "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I found myself replaying our relationship in my mind. The early days had been so full of promise, like a storybook romance. But now, it felt like I was trapped in someone else's story. One where Rachel was still the leading lady and I was just a supporting character. I knew I needed clarity, answers, something to help me understand why James couldn't let go of her memory. So, I did something I'd never done before. I asked him directly. "James, I said one night after dinner, my voice steady but firm. I need to know the truth. Are you still in love with Rachel? He looked up from his plate, startled by the question. Diane, why would you even ask that? Because it feels like you are, I said, my voice breaking. It feels like I'm just filling the space she left behind. He set his fork down, his expression conflicted. She was special to me. You know that. But she's gone, Diane. I can't change the fact that she was a big part of my life. I'm not asking you to forget her, I said, tears brimming in my eyes. I'm asking you to stop comparing me to her, to see me for who I am, not who I'm not. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never meant to make you feel this way. I guess I didn't realize how much I was bringing her into our relationship. You didn't realize? I asked, incredulous. James, every time you mention her, it's like a dagger to my heart. How could you not see that? He was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the table. Then he said something I'll never forget. Maybe it's not about you, Diane. Maybe it's about me. Those words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. I think I've been holding on to Rachel because I'm afraid of letting her go. She was my first love, and losing her felt like losing a part of myself. But that's not fair to you. You deserve someone who can love you fully, without reservation. For the first time, I saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the pain he'd been carrying, the guilt he felt for holding on to a love that was long gone, but understanding his pain didn't make mine disappear. I appreciate your honesty, James, I said softly, but I need to know, can you let her go? Can you choose me, fully and completely? He looked at me, and in that moment I saw the answer in his eyes. He wanted to, but he didn't know how. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. I packed a small bag, told James I needed some space, and drove to my sister's house an hour away. She welcomed me with open arms, her warmth and understanding a balm for my broken heart. Over the next few days, I reflected on my relationship with James. I thought about the good times, the laughter and love we had shared, but I also thought about the constant comparisons, the feeling of never being enough. One evening, as I sat on my sister's porch with a cup of tea, she asked me a question that pierced through my haze of doubt. Diane, do you feel loved by James? Truly loved? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. I think he loves me in his own way, but I don't feel like I'm his first choice. I feel like I'm living in someone else's shadow. My sister nodded, her expression thoughtful. You deserve to be someone's son, Diane, not their shadow. Her words stayed with me as I drove back home a few days later. When I walked through the door, James was waiting for me, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. I missed you, he said, his voice soft. I missed you too, I admitted, but we need to talk. We sat down in the living room and I told him everything, how his comparisons had made me feel, how much it hurt to live in Rachel's shadow, and how I couldn't keep doing it. James listened quietly, his expression pained. When I finished, he took my hands in his grip firm but gentle. Diane, I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I never meant to make you feel like you weren't enough. You are enough. More than enough. I want to do better. For you. For us. His words were sincere, but sincerity alone wouldn't fix what had been broken. I need to know that you're willing to let her go, James, I said, my voice steady. Not forget her, but let go of the pedestal you've put her on. I can't be Rachel. I can only be me. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'll try, Diane. I promise I'll try. And so we began the difficult process of rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of pain, but also moments of hope. James started going to therapy, working through his unresolved feelings about Rachel. I focused on building my own confidence, reminding myself that I was worthy of love just as I was. In the end, our relationship didn't survive. Not because we didn't love each other, but because sometimes love isn't enough. Letting go of James was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also one of the most empowering. I learned that love should never make you feel small. It should never make you feel like you're living in someone else's shadow. And while my time with James was filled with both joy and heartache, it taught me an important lesson. I deserve to be someone's son. If this story resonates with you, like, comment, and subscribe.